Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Sunday, October the 5th, 2025. In keeping with the short theme that we had starting yesterday, using the Louise Gluck poem, I would like to read another one today having to do with All Souls. It's called All Souls Night by William Butler Yeats, and it was the epilogue to A Vision. If you don't know about W.B. Yeats, I think we've read him earlier in this series, and probably his most famous poem is The Second Coming. He was an Irish modernist poet who was writing, if I recall correctly, mostly at the beginning of the 20th century. And a lot of his work was abstract, mystical, interested in myths, Celtic spirits, fairies, druids, things like that. He wanted to give a unique expression to Irish poetry that would separate it from British poetry, English poetry. Of course, he was writing in English. But for many years after his death, he was not really taken seriously as a major poet in the English language. In fact, a lot of people didn't really take Irish poetry or Irish literature that seriously until like the 1960s. It wasn't considered a worthy thing to do one's dissertation on. But Yeats remains one of the most important modernist writers in the English language and probably one of the most complex and yet beautiful poets that we have. So this is his poem All Souls Night by W.B. Yeats. Midnight has come, and the great Christ Church bell and many a lesser bell sound through the room, and it is All Souls Night. And two long glasses brimmed with muscatel bubble upon the table. A ghost may come, for it is a ghost's right, his element is so fine, being sharpened by his death, to drink from the wine breath, while our gross palates drank from the whole wine. I need some mind that, if the cannon sound from every quarter of the world can stay wound and minds pondering, as mummies in the mummy cloth are wound, because I have a marvelous thing to say. A certain marvelous thing, none but the living mock, though not for sober ear. It may be all that here should laugh and weep an hour upon the clock. Horton's the first I call. He loved strange thought, and knew that sweet extremity of pride that's called platonic love, and that to such a pitch of passion wrought nothing could bring him when his lady died, anodyne for his love. Words were but wasted breath. One dear hope had he, the inclemency of that, or the next winter would be death. Two thoughts were so mixed up I could not tell whether of her or God he thought the most. But think that his mind's eye, when upward turned on one sole image fell, and that a slight companionable ghost, wild with divinity, had so lit up the whole immense miraculous house the Bible promised us, it seemed a goldfish swimming in a bowl. On Florence Emery I call the next, who finding the first wrinkles on a face admired and beautiful, and by foreknowledge of the future vexed, diminished beauty, multiplied commonplace, preferred to teach a school, away from neighbor or friend, among dark skins, and there permit foul years to wear, hidden from eyesight, to the unnoticed end. Before that end, much had she ravelled out, from a discourse in figurative speech by some learned Indian on a soul's journey. How it is whirled about, whenever the orbit of the moon can reach until it plunge into the sun, and there, free and yet fast, being both chance and choice, forget its broken toys, and sink into its own delight at last. I call MacGregor Mathers from his grave, for in my first hard springtime we were friends, although of late estranged. I thought him half a lunatic, half knave, and told him so, but friendship never ends. And what if mind seemed changed, and it seemed changed with the mind, when thoughts rise up, unbid, on generous things that he did, and I go half contented to be blind. He had much industry at setting out, much boisterous courage, before loneliness had driven him crazed. For meditations upon unknown thought make human intercourse grow less and less. They are neither paid nor praised. But he'd object to the host. The glass, because my glass. A ghost lover he was, and may have grown more arrogant being a ghost. But names are nothing. What matter who it be, so that his elements have grown so fine? The fume of muscatel can give his sharpened palate ecstasy. No living man can drink from the whole wine. I have mummy truths to tell. Whereat the living mock, though not for sober ear, for maybe all that hear should laugh and weep an hour upon the clock. Such thought have I that hold it right. Till meditation master all its parts, nothing can stay my glance until that glance run in the world's despite, to where the damned have howled away their hearts, and where the blessed dance. Such thought, that in it bound, I need no other thing. Wound in mind's wandering, wound in mind's wandering, as mummies and mummy cloth are wound. My apologies for that second to last line there with wound and wound. I even had it marked of which way to pronounce it, and I did the other one. All right, so there are some similarities to the Louise Gluck poem that we read yesterday, in that on this All Souls Night, or All Hallows, as Louise wrote about yesterday, we have the speaker calling out to people that have died and who have gone before them, attempting to summon them and summon their ghosts. In the Gluck poem, the speaker is much more distinguishable from the poet themselves, because the speaker is more objective, more distant, more distinct. In the Yeats poem, I don't think we should necessarily read this as Yeats. I'm always very suspicious of doing that and reluctant to do that. However, as I mentioned before I read the poem, a lot of the attitudes within this poem that are expressed by the speaker are things that Yeats himself shared. The idea that perhaps you could contact the dead, summon the dead, that there were omens or channels or portals. I don't know that he necessarily believed all of that, but he was someone given to what we might call magical thinking, or a belief in something otherworldly that wasn't necessarily tied to Catholicism or Christianity. And so the idea that even though this poem is set at midnight and the great Christ Church bell and the lesser bells are sounding, so even though we're established here in a setting that is explicitly Christian and is at midnight mass upon the turning of to All Souls Night, the thing that's being asked in here is something that I think pushes on and troubles a Christian theology. They're sitting in All Souls Night in mass, drinking wine. And as the speaker reminisces upon, I think, three specific friends that they had from their life, first being Horton, and then Florence Emery, and then finally MacGregor Mathers, they are calling them forth, and the calling forth, I think, serves a double purpose. One being calling forth in one's mind and a remembrance, but there's also a sense, I believe, that the speaker is attempting or wishing to call them forth the way that the speaker in All Hallows yesterday also tried to call the spirit of the little girl out of the tree to her. And so what I think Yeats is doing in this poem, among many other things, is asking us really kind of what's the difference there between the memory of someone and the ghost of someone. Hamlet kind of troubles this as well, where he says that he had seen his father in his mind's eye. And Horatio at first is like, wait, you saw your father too? We were just going to tell you that like there's a ghost in the graveyard. But then Hamlet says, I see him in my mind's eye. And yet for Hamlet, it's much more vivid than the typical memory of grief. It's something like depression and melancholy that seems to conjure and summon that spirit for him. There's less of that, I think, the depression and melancholy in this poem, because there's kind of some wryness to the tone with which the speaker remembers some of his friends. I think I'm looking specifically at the MacGregor Mathers one. that they were friends, but then they were estranged near his death, and he calls him a half lunatic, half knave. Yet friendship never ends. This is kind of the eulogy that somebody gives when they were really good, really close friends, but also sort of reflects on and doesn't ignore some of the faults or problems that the person that they're eulogizing had. Um, and as he's thinking about those, he says that thoughts rise up unbid on generous things he did, and that changes his mind. So even though he harbors some sort of bitterness or some sort of negative image of McGregor Mathers because they had a falling out, he still gets these sort of involuntary memories having to do with some of the good things that his friend had done. And after spending, I think, 2 stanzas on each of his friends, this is a 10 stanza poem with 10 lines per stanza, so it's 100 lines. The speaker reflects that names are nothing. What matter who it be? So that the elements have grown so fine, the fume of muscatel can give his sharpened palate ecstasy. No living man can drink from the whole wine. I have mummy truths to tell. I struggle with the ending of this poem because after specifically reflecting on these friends of his and kind of conjuring them up in his memory and calling out to them, he then says the names are not the things that matter. So what matters? Is it the thought? Is it the meditation? Is it, what are these mummy thoughts? Because we end with that as well, that I need no other thing, wound in mind's wondering as mummies in the mummy cloth are wound. So he returns to this reference to mummies, and mummies we know as monsters were wound up, tied up in order to be preserved in their human form, and then as the myth goes, they arise and they walk. There's also within the mummy a suggestion of a colonialism there, because a lot of these mummies, at least in the film, were excavated by the English and placed in museums, taken from their homeland and put on display. And within a lot of Yeats's poems, there are undercurrents of reflections and pushing back on colonialism and imperialism from the English as well. And I don't know if he's attempting to surface that in the reader's mind by referring to the mummy thoughts in this poem, but it is something that I think is important because, like I said, it's even in stanza 2, right? He says, I need some mind that if the cannon sound from every quarter of the world can stay, wound in mind's pondering as mummies in mummy cloth are wound. So again, we get that couplet that then is kind of serves as a refrain at the end of the poem. Because I have marvelous things to say, right after that he says, right? And marvelous, we don't mean necessarily wonderful, but the things of marvel, worth marveling at, though others will mock it. And so he believes that he is privy to this certain knowledge or this certain ability to commune with the dead that the rest of the more serious world is not going to take seriously and is going to then in turn mock him. Yet he doesn't care. He goes on for 10 stanzas, reflecting on his friends for good or for better and attempting to call them forth at this moment. So it's a combination of the occasion of a Christian ceremony with some more kind of pre-Christian beliefs and then mixing in elements of horror within it as well. Interesting poem. It says it's the epilogue to a vision. I haven't read a vision, but now I really want to. And as always, but especially with this one, because this was longer, there are far more things to say about this poem than I have said. So if you heard anything or if anything struck you as worth a look, please feel free to share your ideas and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I wish you all peace.